There are moments in British boxing that feel carved into the nation's memory, and Randolph Turpin's victory over Sugar Ray Robinson in London in 1951 is one of them. A young man from Leamington Spa walked into the ring as an underdog and stepped out as the pride of a country still rebuilding its spirit. For a brief moment, he stood at the very top of the world, calm, disciplined, and impossibly brave. Yet fame never softened him. It weighed on him. Behind the cheers, he remained a quiet fighter shaped by hardship, someone who recognized sincerity more easily than flattery. In a sport filled with ambition, betrayal, and the relentless noise of promoters, Randolph Turpin held a small circle of respect. It was not earned by titles. It was earned by truth. Who were the people he trusted? Who stood tall in his eyes when so much around him felt uncertain? And who carried a place in his heart long after the lights faded? Today, we rediscover the 5 individuals Randolph Turpin respected the most, the 5 names that shaped his journey from a determined boy to a national champion. Randolph Turpin's story began far from the glamour that would one day surround his name. Born in Leamington Spa in 1928, he grew up in a family that worked hard for every small comfort. Boxing was not a career at first, but a way to stay grounded, a way to protect himself in a world that rarely offered second chances. His natural strength and disciplined temperament quickly marked him as someone different, someone with a quiet fire that could not be ignored. As an amateur, he rose fast, moving with a sense of purpose that impressed those who watched him train. By the late 1940s, he had become one of Britain's brightest prospects, and it was not long before he earned the European middleweight title. His punches were crisp, his footwork confident, and his resilience unmistakable. Everything about him suggested a man who understood struggle and carried it into the ring as strength. Then came 1951. Sugar Ray Robinson arrived in London as the reigning champion, widely considered the finest boxer of his generation. Few believed Turpin had a chance, yet he fought with a level of composure and strategic brilliance that stunned the boxing world. When his hand was raised, the country erupted. For many British fans, it felt like the first great sporting triumph after years of hardship and recovery. But success brought pressure Turpin had never been prepared for. The politics of promoters, financial strain, and the weight of expectation slowly tightened around him. His reign at the top was brief, but the impact he left on British boxing was profound. He became a symbol of courage, and his character was shaped as much by the battles outside the ring as by those within it. Number 5. Jackie Turpin. He never forgot where he came from, and that truth began with one man, Jackie Turpin. Before the crowds, before the belts, before London rose to its feet in 1951, Randolph Turpin was simply a younger brother trying to follow the footsteps of a man he admired. Jackie was not just family. He was the first teacher, the quiet mentor who believed in him long before the newspapers ever did. In the backyards of Leamington Spa, it was Jackie who showed him how to plant his feet, how to slip a punch, how to breathe under pressure. These were not formal lessons. They were moments shared between brothers, passed down not for glory but for survival. Jackie had already carved a place for himself in the British boxing scene, and Randolph watched him closely, absorbing every detail. It was not only technique he learned. It was discipline, self-respect, and the understanding that strength meant very little without control. Jackie saw something unusual in Randolph, a sharpness of instinct that set him apart. He encouraged him, pushed him, and protected him. When Randolph's amateur career began to rise, Jackie was the first to remind him that recognition could vanish as quickly as it appeared. He told him to stay grounded, to fight with purpose, to let his fists speak but never become louder than his conscience. Randolph carried those lessons for life. There were evenings when both brothers trained in near silence, sharing a rhythm only they understood. Jackie's voice broke that silence occasionally, offering short, firm phrases that Randolph never forgot. He once told him, "You owe the world nothing, but you owe yourself honesty." Those words became a compass during the turbulent seasons that followed. Even after Randolph surpassed Jackie in fame, the respect remained intact. He did not see his eldest brother as someone he had outgrown, but as the foundation on which his entire career was built. In private conversations, Randolph often credited Jackie for shaping his early discipline, the very discipline that allowed him to stand toe-to-toe with the finest boxer in the world. Without Jackie, the victory over Sugar Ray Robinson would never have existed in the same way. When life began to shift under the weight of expectations and financial pressure, Jackie remained one of the few people Randolph could speak to without fear of judgment. Their bond was not wrapped in glory but in shared struggle, family loyalty, and an unspoken understanding of how hard the world could be. Jackie's influence reminded him that strength was not measured solely by the force of a punch, but by a man's ability to stay true to himself. Randolph respected many fighters, many promoters, many champions, but Jackie held a different place. He represented origins, honesty, and brotherhood. He was the one who taught Randolph that a fighter's journey begins long before the first bell rings. It begins in the quiet places, guided by the people who see your worth when the rest of the world has not yet begun to look. Jackie Turpin was not the most famous man in Randolph's life, but he was one of the most important. And respect, in Randolph's world, was measured by significance, not headlines. Number 4. Jack Solomons. He respected greatness, but he also respected power, and in British boxing of the 1950s, no figure carried more influence than Jack Solomons. To many fighters, Solomons was a complicated presence, a man whose decisions could elevate a career or crush it within a single evening. But to Randolph Turpin, he was the catalyst, the man who recognized potential before the world had fully opened its eyes. Solomons was already a legendary promoter by the time Randolph began to climb the rankings. His reputation was sharp, his business sense unforgiving, and his eyes were trained to spot fighters who could draw crowds. When he looked at Randolph Turpin, he saw what few others understood at the time, a British fighter capable of challenging the very best in the world, even the mighty Sugar Ray Robinson. That belief alone placed him in a rare category of respect. Their relationship was never simple. Solomons pushed hard, negotiated harder, and showed no patience for hesitation. Yet Randolph admired this clarity. In a world where nothing was guaranteed, Solomons acted with decisive force. He cut through doubt. He demanded excellence. And Randolph, shaped by years of hardship, responded to that intensity. He saw in Solomons a man who operated by instinct and conviction, traits he valued deeply. The moment that defined their connection came in 1951, when Solomons orchestrated the historic fight between Turpin and Robinson. It was a risk. Many considered it reckless. Robinson was the reigning champion, a fighter whose skill seemed almost untouchable. But Solomons believed that Randolph's timing, strength, and composure could create an upset. When he told Randolph, "You are ready for him," it was not flattery. It was certainty. And Randolph trusted that certainty more than praise from any journalist or commentator. After Turpin's victory, Solomons stood in the shadows as the nation erupted. He was not a man who sought applause, yet he understood the weight of what had just happened. British boxing had reclaimed a piece of its pride, and Randolph's triumph became one of the greatest nights the sport had ever witnessed on home soil. Although they would later clash over financial matters, the respect remained. Randolph admired the promoter who dared to give him the shot that changed everything. Behind closed doors, there were arguments, tense negotiations, and moments when their differences seemed unbridgeable. But Randolph never confused conflict with disrespect. He understood that Solomons fought his own battles in a world just as brutal as the ring itself. The promoter's toughness, his refusal to bow to public pressure, and his relentless pursuit of opportunity mirrored the fighter's own stubborn resilience. Even in later years, when life grew heavier and the realities of fame left deep marks on Randolph's spirit, he spoke of Solomons with a mixture of gratitude and clarity. He once confided to a friend that without Solomons, the path to Robinson would have been far longer, perhaps even impossible. He knew that certain figures alter the course of a career, and Solomons was undeniably one of them. Jack Solomons was not a friend. He was not a mentor. He was something rarer in Randolph Turpin's world. He was a man whose belief carried consequences, whose decisions shaped destiny. For that, Randolph held him in a regard that never faded. Number 3. Bruce Woodcock. He admired toughness, but not the kind measured by noise or bravado. Randolph Turpin respected the quiet kind, the strength that endures without needing attention, and in Bruce Woodcock he saw exactly that. Woodcock was a symbol of post-war British resilience, a man who fought with the spirit of a country trying to rebuild itself. Long before Randolph reached fame, Woodcock had already become a household name, the heavyweight champion who carried himself with modesty despite the weight of national expectation. To the young Turpin, Woodcock represented something greater than belts. He represented dignity under pressure. Every time Woodcock stepped into the ring, he did so with a calmness that seemed to defy the violence of the sport. Turpin watched him closely, studying the way he moved, the way he refused to be shaken by the crowd or his opponents. It was not mimicry. It was a form of quiet admiration. Their paths crossed occasionally in gyms and promotional events. Woodcock was always friendly, offering small gestures of encouragement that carried more meaning than long speeches. Randolph remembered one moment in particular. After a tough sparring session, Woodcock approached him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Keep your head steady. You fight best when you stay yourself." That simple advice stayed with Randolph through the hardest chapters of his career. It was a reminder that identity mattered as much as form. Woodcock's own journey was marked by triumph and tragedy. His success came early, but so did the struggles that followed. Injuries forced him to retire sooner than expected, and the public, once adoring, moved on with unsettling speed. Randolph recognized the pain behind Woodcock's polite smile, the sorrow of an athlete whose body no longer allowed him to express the greatness he once carried so easily. This vulnerability deepened Randolph's respect. He understood that every fighter has a breaking point, and that honor lies not only in victory but in the courage to face decline with grace. There was also a symbolic connection between them. Both came from working-class backgrounds. Both fought in an era when boxing was not glamour but labor, and both knew what it meant to carry the expectations of ordinary people who searched for hope in their victories. Turpin admired the way Woodcock never distanced himself from the public. He remained approachable, grounded, and grateful even when the spotlight began to fade. In quiet moments, Randolph reflected on Woodcock's career as a warning and an inspiration. He saw how fragility and glory could coexist, how a fighter could be celebrated and forgotten within a few short years. It shaped the way he approached his own success. It reminded him not to cling too tightly to fame and to remain aware of how quickly life can turn. Their relationship was not intimate, yet it was profound in its own way. Randolph did not need long conversations to feel the impact Woodcock had on him. The example was enough. The presence was enough. The humility was enough. When Randolph spoke of the fighters he respected, Woodcock's name surfaced with a particular softness, as though it belonged to a chapter he held close. Bruce Woodcock embodied the strength and vulnerability of a true British fighter, and in him Randolph Turpin saw a reflection of the man he hoped to become. Respect of that kind is not loud. It lives quietly, just like the men who earn it. Number 2. Freddie Mills. He respected courage, but the kind that hides behind a smile left an even deeper impression on him. Freddie Mills was that kind of man. To the public, Mills was cheerful, approachable, and endlessly charismatic, a fighter who seemed to carry joy wherever he went. But Randolph Turpin understood that behind the charm lay a weight few could imagine. In Mills, he saw not only a national hero, but a fellow boxer burdened by private battles. Mills was already a beloved figure when Turpin was rising through the ranks. As the light heavyweight champion of the world, he embodied the post-war British dream, a man from modest beginnings who fought with heart rather than arrogance. Turpin admired him from a distance at first, drawn to the way Mills treated fans with warmth and fellow fighters with quiet respect. There was no vanity in him, no pretense. In a sport filled with egos, this simplicity made him stand out. Their interactions were brief but memorable. Mills greeted Randolph with a sincerity that caught him off guard. After one event, he leaned in and said, "You are carrying something heavy, but you fight like you still believe in tomorrow." For Randolph, it was not the words themselves but the understanding behind them that mattered. He sensed that Mills recognized the same shadows he faced. Two boxers who had both climbed out of hardship, both praised yet misunderstood, both battling the noise outside and the silence within. The respect grew deeper as Randolph learned more about Mills's struggles, the injuries that never healed properly, the financial pressure, the emotional strain of being a national figure. Mills bore these burdens with a smile, choosing to lift others despite the weight he carried alone. That resilience, that insistence on kindness despite the pain, left a mark on Randolph. It taught him that strength did not always shout. Sometimes it whispered. Then came the tragedy. In 1965, Freddie Mills was found dead under circumstances that remain debated to this day. Official reports suggested suicide, yet rumors and suspicions persisted. The public grieved, shocked by the sudden loss of a man who had seemed so full of life. But Randolph felt a different kind of sorrow. He knew too well how the pressure of fame could hollow a man from within, how the world often celebrated fighters while ignoring the wounds they hid. Mills's death forced Randolph to confront his own fragilities. He saw in Freddie a mirror of what could happen when the battles outside the ring become louder than the battles within it. This connection deepened his respect even further. Mills had shown grace in suffering, courage in silence, and generosity in moments when he himself needed support. In later years, Randolph spoke of Freddie Mills with a tenderness rarely heard in his voice. He admired not only the champion but the man behind the belt. He admired the laughter that masked exhaustion, the kindness that survived hardship, the strength that took no pride in its own existence. For Randolph Turpin, Freddie Mills was more than a hero of British boxing. He was a reminder that even the brightest lights carry shadows, and that the true measure of a fighter lies not only in how he wins, but in how he endures. Number 1. Sugar Ray Robinson. He respected many men, but only one stood at the summit of his admiration. Sugar Ray Robinson was more than an opponent. He was the measure of greatness, the fighter who defined an era, the man whose presence reshaped the way Randolph Turpin understood the sport he had dedicated his life to. To respect Robinson was not an act of humility, it was a recognition of truth. When Robinson first arrived in London in 1951, he brought with him an aura that Britain had rarely seen. He was the reigning world champion, a master of movement, timing, and precision. Newspapers declared the fight a formality. Commentators predicted a swift victory. Yet Randolph watched Robinson with a different eye. He studied him not as a star, but as a puzzle, a craftsman watching another craftsman, searching for the lines where genius becomes human. What he found was not weakness, but depth. Robinson controlled distance with ease, struck with frightening accuracy, and carried himself with the poise of a man who understood his place in history. And strangely, this only increased Randolph's respect. He felt no intimidation, only clarity. To become more than a local champion, he would have to face the greatest. And Robinson was unquestionably the greatest. Their first fight changed British boxing forever. Randolph fought with a calmness that surprised even his closest supporters. He blocked, countered, stepped inside the champion's rhythm, and refused to be overwhelmed by the legend in front of him. When the final bell rang and the decision was announced, London erupted. Randolph Turpin had defeated Sugar Ray Robinson. In that moment of triumph, his respect for Robinson did not diminish. It deepened. He knew exactly what he had overcome. Robinson's reaction left a lasting mark. There was no bitterness, no excuses. He acknowledged Turpin's strength with measured words, saying quietly, "He hit harder than I expected." That sentence stayed with Randolph for the rest of his life. Respect from ordinary men is pleasant. Respect from a legend is transformative. When they met again in New York for the rematch, Randolph understood that the man across the ring was not the same Robinson. This was a champion fully awakened, sharpened by defeat, fueled by the desire to reclaim what was his. The fight was brutal, intense, and emotionally draining. When Robinson regained the title, Randolph felt no resentment. He felt admiration. He had witnessed a champion rise under pressure with dignity intact. Outside the ring, the two men shared brief conversations marked by mutual understanding. Robinson spoke to him as an equal, not as a challenger who had upset him. Their exchanges were calm, respectful, and threaded with an honesty rarely found in the world of professional boxing. Randolph valued these small moments, the simple gestures that revealed character behind legacy. In the years that followed, as Randolph's life grew more difficult and fame became a shadow rather than a light, his respect for Robinson remained clear and unwavering. He admired Robinson's discipline, his resilience, and the way he carried the burden of greatness without allowing it to corrupt his spirit. Few fighters could inspire him beyond the ring. Robinson did. For Randolph Turpin, Sugar Ray Robinson was the benchmark, the opponent who became a symbol, the symbol who became a lesson. and the lesson that stayed with him long after the cheers had faded. In the end, the 5 men Randolph Turpin respected the most tell us as much about him as they do about themselves. They formed a quiet map of his inner world, a world built on discipline, loyalty, and the courage to face one's own shadows. Jackie Turpin gave him roots, reminding him that strength begins at home. Jack Solomons opened the door to history, proving that opportunity requires boldness. Bruce Woodcock showed him dignity, the kind that survives long after the cheers fade. Freddie Mills revealed the hidden cost of glory and the value of kindness in the face of private battles. And Sugar Ray Robinson embodied excellence, the unreachable summit that all fighters measure themselves against. These 5 figures shaped Randolph not through glory alone, but through struggle, vulnerability, and the simple humanity they carried beneath their reputations. Their presence in his life became a set of guiding lights, helping him navigate a landscape of fame that often felt harsher than the ring itself. As the years passed and his own journey grew heavier, the respect he held for them remained untouched. It was not tied to victories or headlines. It was tied to character, to truth, to the quiet knowledge that the people we honor reflect the person we strive to become. For the fans who remember him, Randolph Turpin stands not only as a champion, but as a man defined by the values he chose to hold dear. And in that, his legacy endures.